Ladies and gentlemen, let's Gaming Telecom video. We're going to be talking about the Xbox One and the Xbox One Scorpio. Specifically, some conflicting information that's floating around the internet right now. So you might recall from yesterday that Rod Ferguson from Coalition Studios had told us that Gears of War 4, he is by the way the head of the studio, that Gears of War 4 would look better on the Xbox One S thanks to a more beefy CPU and GPU, and that their engineers, Coalition Studio engineers, have been able to take advantage of that by reducing the frequency of frame rate or resolution penalties during demanding sections of the game. Remember, Gears of War 4 employs dynamic resolution. For those who don't know, it just means that if a section of a game is more taxing, the resolution will drop down, and in less taxing sections or less taxing frames of animation, the resolution can bump up a little. Okay, great. So, with that, you can immediately assume, based upon this information, that the CPU and GPU are more powerful than the original. There's an upclock or something different is going on, because once again, he's saying that there's additional CPU or GPU performance. Now here's where it starts getting a little confusing, and to say a little confusing is a massive understatement. A couple of interviews have started to pop up on the internet. By the way, I also want to add, I'll be doing a full analysis of the Xbox One Scorpio, or the Xbox Scorpio, whatever the hell it ends up being called, specifications, but I wanted to hold off over the past 24 to 48 hours because a lot of information has started to emerge from interviews and some leaked images, and some developers are talking and all this stuff, so I wanted to put it with as much information as possible rather than just getting something out there which is going to be outdated in 24 hours. Anyway, moving back to what the Xbox One S is, and then we'll talk about the Scorpio confusion. So, Albert Pinello has stated that the additional CPU and GPU access granted to developers will have literally no impact in the performance of games. And he said that, and I quote, "To support HDR, we give people a little more access to the CPU and GPU, and that's it. It's insignificant, it's mind-boggling, it's being picked up on." Then they added that, and I quote, "The performance difference is, I promise it won't even show up. It will have literally no impact on games at all. Literally no impact. They will be identical. It's nothing. It's literally nothing." By the way, in case you think I'm ad-libbing there, no, that is his exact quote. So, you can't get much clearer than that, right? Phil Spencer then added something to this. The Xbox One games exactly the way your original Xbox One does. The definitive feature is it's different is HDR, so that will be an increased HDMI capability, so it supports HDMI high dynamic range. You can expect it to play the game exactly the way your original Xbox One does. We did not design this Xbox One to play games better than the original console. Okay. The confusion continues, however, with the Scorpio. So, just for those of you who are not familiar, the Scorpio is a vastly more powerful system than the original Xbox. Essentially, it's a 6 teraflop gaming machine compared to about 1.3 of the original Xbox. It's been touted as 4K gaming, which was basically what they revealed at E3, but the confusion is that there have been a couple of interviews. The first is that if you are running, and this is the first message from Phil Spencer, if you're running a 1080p television, don't bother to buy the Scorpio. Scorpio is designed as a 4K console. If you don't have a 4K TV, the benefit we've designed for, you're not going to see it. You should just buy an Xbox One S, because the Scorpio is not going to do anything for you. Those were the question. That's the exact answer, and that was asking what the reviewer actually had as a television, and the reviewer had a 1080p television, so he said, no, you don't really need that. If you're going to buy a 4K TV, then great, go for it, but otherwise, no. Scorpio is for the person who's got a 4K TV, who's really focused on 4K gaming. It's going to be a premium price over what we're selling this one for, and both of them will exist in the market at the same time. Scorpio is for your 4K gamer. That's what we've designed it for. End quote. That sounds pretty cut and dry, right? Basically, it's going to look the same, you've just got extra performance, which makes sense considering roughly 4 times the performance increase, 4 times the amount of pixels from 1080p to 4K, it's literally 4 times the number of pixels. Everything makes sense and everything's right in the world. Well, no, because Phil then decided to backtrack on the statement. He said that game developers will be able to utilize whatever they want the GPU of the Scorpio to do. He said, and I quote, "Scorpio is a 6 teraflop gaming machine, which will be a great gaming machine for true 4K gaming, giving you native 4K frame buffer so you can see games in all of their beauty." So far so good, so far same message, but he then added, or if developers want to use those 6 teraflops in other ways, they're free to do that. So in short, he's now saying, well, we actually don't mind if you don't do 4K. You can use 1440p and go with a higher frame rate. You could go 1080p and go with an amazing lighting and shadows and textures and whatever the hell else you want to do. You can do whatever you want. It's really down to you. But really, we're designing the machine for 4K, which is absolutely bizarre because, once again, it's a slightly different message than the original. Now, before I go any further, I want to point out that I'm not bad-mouthing Microsoft here. I am actually really looking forward to the Scorpio. I really am curious to learn more about it. Same thing with the Xbox One S. The problem is, it feels like they're once again not on the same page, and it's very much shades of 2013, and a lot of folks on message boards and a lot of folks on the internet in general are just confused at the moment of what the hell is going on. For example, Pinello had said that the CPU and GPU performance, it's insignificant, that it's mind-boggling, it's being picked up on. Those were Pinello's words. The problem is, Rod Ferguson, who once again is the head of Coalition Studios, which once again is producing Gears of War 4, which I'm pretty sure you'll agree is one of Microsoft's biggest gaming IPs. It's not like it's some third-party developer who are putting together a small indie platformer. I'm not taking anything away from an indie developer, I'm just simply saying that it's like, if someone of the stature and working on such a big IP says A, you can't be then surprised by people who are taking that and saying, well, if they're saying there's more performance, then there's got to be something to it. Now, my personal take on all of this is it's obvious that Microsoft themselves, and I refer to Scorpio here, have not thought all of this through. And by what I mean by that is that the system is still in development. So it's probable that they haven't actually exactly figured out how they're gonna give guidelines to developers. So for example, they might not have figured out, okay, well, here's the minimum frame rate we expect with Scorpio. Is there going to be a frame rate difference? For example, does one have to be 60 all the time and one have to be 30? Or does one have to have a minimum resolution? For example, maybe they're going to impose a minimum of 1080p on Scorpio, but on the original Xbox it has to be like 720p, I don't know. Maybe with Scorpio they have to do a certain minimal amount to say that the game runs on Scorpio, otherwise it's just considered a basic Xbox One game. Or maybe all Xbox One games released around the time that Scorpio is released need to have a little bit of additional work to them. I don't know, I'm just saying, maybe they're still drawing up those documents, maybe they're talking with developers, maybe developers are still giving feedback on what they're willing to do to actually put that extra work into the development. The Xbox One S is more confusing to me, however, and there are a myriad of different reasons it could be that this has happened. The first is that both Albert Pinello and Phil Spencer are wrong. It could be that Rod Ferguson is wrong. It could be that it's more performance, but it's so insignificant that it's not really worth talking about. For example, it could be that rather than running at, and I'm just throwing out a number here, I'm not saying this is what it really does, but rather than running at 900p and dropping to, let's say, 792p every 500 frames, I'm just purely making up arbitrary numbers here, with the original Xbox, it could be it takes 600 frames to drop, on average, I'm talking averages here, at 792 on the Xbox One S, or maybe every 505 frames, so very, 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 very subtle differences. Or maybe there is no GPU and CPU upclock at all, and they've just simply given more access to the GPU and CPU. Maybe they've reduced the OS overhead slightly in the Slim, because it doesn't have the connect port, so maybe they've done something to reduce the overhead of those drivers unless you've got the connect in. We don't know. I'm just simply throwing out examples of what it could be. It's just a bit weird, and I'm not saying Microsoft is screwing up really badly with this, because all companies at some point or another have mixed messages, but I do hope that at some point or another it just does get a little more on track. And it's a bit bizarre how they've managed to say one thing, but realistically just 24 or 48 hours someone else is contradicting them. Unfortunately, this is kind of how things go as things are being created. So for example, sometimes one part of the studio doesn't get a memo. It could be that because the because Gears of War is using dynamic resolution, the developers are noticing it more. Maybe it's because they're utilizing HDR with their engine, therefore that's why, which is another possibility. So for example, because they're using HDR with the Xbox One S, they've noticed that the performance is a little more stable. It could be that their engine just happens to do X. We don't know. And unfortunately, until the game's actually released and we have both systems to test it on, so we as users can actually say, okay, we can do some frame rate testing here, or we as users can start saying, okay, well, on these games, and we test it on a good portion of games, not just one, but we test, like, let's say 10, 15 different titles, and say, okay, we've noticed a trend that after the 15 games we've tested, 0 of them have any frame rate differences, and pixel counting shows that all of the resolution is the same across the different games, with a margin of error of like 1%. Or we could see the reverse. We could say, hey, you know what? Out of the 15 games we've tested, 5 of them have slight performance advantages by an average of 1 to 2 frames a second, so they managed to once again have a slightly better frame rate, especially in multiplayer. We just don't know what's going to happen, but it's a bit weird. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.